Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. I'm Austin Tishner, co-artistic director of the Reduced Shakespeare Company, and you're listening to this week's Reduced Shakespeare Company podcast, now in its 20th year, number 1004, Shakespeare Schools Festival. The Shakespeare Schools Festival is the product of the Coram Shakespeare Schools Foundation, one of the UK's oldest cultural education charities that gives young people the confidence and skills to succeed in life by using the unique power of Shakespeare to transform lives. Mike Tucker is the head of the Shakespeare Schools Foundation, and after hearing him speak at the Shakespeare Theatre Association conference back in January, I asked him to come on the podcast and talk about how his foundation uses Shakespeare to build confidence, well-being, and life skills in young people and not make it seem like work. We always understand that, if you have to study Shakespeare in school, that's the worst. You should really experience Shakespeare by seeing him live or speaking him aloud or watching him performed. And here you are, the head of an organization that has both Shakespeare and schools together in your name. But you are all about bringing the speech to life. Am I right?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And as you say, these are plays originally performed by players in playhouses. They're meant to be played with, they're not meant to be dusty tomes that sit on a shelf and just get taken down for English lessons, right? It is very much our reason for being to bring these plays to life. And I think that just requires two things. It requires a great deal of trust in teachers to kind of know what they're doing, and it requires a little bit of license for them to fail. And I think we work in an education sector in the UK where over the last 10 years we've seen a shift in the curriculum towards trying to stamp out that failure and to stamp out those spaces where teachers can play, teachers can get these texts, up on their feet as drama and experiment with adaptive ways of working. And we're all about reintroducing those spaces and inherently trusting teachers. Yeah.
Well, and that's an interesting idea, is that that failure is absolutely required in a certain degree, because you learn the most from failure, and it emphasizes the fact that there is no one correct, proper, right way to either do Shakespeare or teach him.
Absolutely. There's an instinct with teachers we meet who've perhaps not worked with Shakespeare much. And a lot of the teachers that we do are not English specialists. They're not even drama specialists. They're coming to this afresh. And their assumption of what Shakespeare is, what it should be like, is pretty traditional. We
Yeah.
spend a lot of time doing work unpicking the notion of the Shakespeare police, that there's someone who's going to kind of knock on the door at the rehearsal and say, you're not saying it right, you're not standing in the right place, you're not delivering the lines in the way that, Laurence Olivier or someone delivered it in the past. And as an organization that is not a theatre company, we're not a theatre building, and we're not a producer, we are deliberately there to use these plays for their educational good, and creating that space where you say to a young person, no, these are your words, they're owned by you for the moment that you're speaking them. Bring to those words your story in a way, and you can create a great sense of both ownership and a revelation for young people that these plays, one, aren't the boring, as I say, dusty tomes that have perhaps been taught in a certain way. They are live, they are fresh, and this guy is speaking to them from 400 years ago with themes relevant, characters, and ways of understanding the world that is still so live and vital.
I know how we take Shakespeare off his pedestal,
Mhm.
by taking the piss and treating him with reverent irreverence, or irreverent reverence, I suppose,
Mhm.
or irreverence, to coin a word that ever going to pick up on. Um, how do you embolden your teachers and your students to not think of Shakespeare as this icon that must be treated with reverence and obedience?
Where do we start? We often, as those that work in the drama space, start with the text. That is not what we do with our teachers. We do not necessarily start with the text. We start with the worlds of the play and the characters. And
Mm,
I think if the first lesson that you as a young person encounter perhaps in your rehearsal process is one where you're exploring a, you know, a bloody battlefield, a spooky castle, the ancient city of Rome, you can embody what that looks and feels like for young people before you start to introduce these incredible characters who don't necessarily have their Shakespeare names yet. And you get to kind of layer in some of the world building that I think really captures young people's imaginations, particularly if they're experiencing him for the first time. But another thing we spend a lot of time on in our rehearsals and the way that we support our teachers is ensemble building and
mm,
thinking to a degree, actually, what was it like for the companies that put on these plays 400 years ago? They were doing so many plays in such rapid succession, they needed to have implicit trust. So, how do we spend time together to build the skills and the connection where there is an ensemble ready to take on this story before we get even to thinking about characters, thinking about text, thinking about the lines that
yeah.
they are perhaps assuming are going to be the preserve of those rehearsals. And then I think you can pull out some of the stories already in the room. The play is in the room, right? If there's a young person in one of our groups who's a fantastic juggler, great. Malvolio is going to be a juggler. If you've got someone who's really good at tennis, how are we going to work that into the story? How do you bring that little bit of yourself? So when you're seen by your
Yeah.
peers on stage and by the community when you get to perform this production, a little bit later on in the process, you get validated for that bit of yourself you brought to the character. So I think starting with those two things, starting with ensemble and bringing yourself, and not worrying if you don't get to the text till pretty late in the rehearsal process. That'll do a lot of the work, and hopefully won't be the obstacle that you think that it is.
Well, and I love that because in my understanding of how the work was created 400 years ago, it was absolutely Shakespeare writing for the actors he had and knowing what skills they had, what they looked like, what skills they didn't have, and writing texts that supported these ideas, giving them lines that these players could play. The kids that go through your program emerge with all of these fabulous skills. As you say, ensemble building maybe even being the strongest. In my head, it feels like, oh, this is doing sports for kids who don't play sports. This is learning how to put on a show, is learning how to compete on a team. How do you slot your work into a curriculum? Do you tell parents and teachers that no, we're studying drama, no, we're studying English, no, we're studying public speaking? Do you know what I'm asking?
Absolutely, and it depends on the context to a
Mm,
degree. And the program that we run is for a huge variety of ages, backgrounds, and abilities. So in the Shakespeare Schools Festival, you could encounter young people who are 8 or 9 years old, encountering these stories for the first time. You could see young people who are 13, 14, 15, about to sit in the UK, their GCSEs, kind of thinking about progression into further education and beyond, or even older. And so I think there is something about saying there is relevance to all of those, both
mhm,
academically, and we've got a lot of resources and supporting guides for teachers to slot it into relevant curriculum in drama and in English. But I think across the piece, there is often an undervaluing of skills. And I say skills, and what I mean by that is a particular set of what are called essential skills, often in the UK, not foundational skills. We're not talking about literacy, we're not talking about reading or numeracy, and we're not talking about kind of functioning skills that one needs to do their job or to go into higher education. Those skills that we need for life, speaking, listening, leadership, adapting, being able to, plan and make something happen in one's life. And there's not a great currency of that in the UK education sector. So we're trying to bring currency to that and say, no, it is just as damn important for young people to deliberately see and try and practice these skills because they are the mediating things that will allow them to succeed later on in life. And I think that through we use a tool called the Universal Skills Builder Framework. It's a brilliant toolkit. It's all across the world now. And I think they have brought great currency to skills building. And I think it's what the world of work and the world in general really needs to add credence to them.
so well said. think, and if I leave this part in, somebody can correct me. I think we call those soft skills here
Yeah,
in the States, a phrase I'm only just become aware of
yeah,
recently.
yeah.
But you're right, they're so important.
And that says a lot. The fact that they're called soft, I don't know, there's something about me that I twitch a little bit when I hear the word soft because they're already second class, right? If they're soft, they're not hard skills like maths and literacy and, the key things that are going to get you a job. We're living in 2026, right? The employers of the future and
Yeah.
the workplace of the future is going to need people who are deft communicators, they're operators, they're people who collaborate and are creative. Let's create that pipeline, let's start deliberately focusing on those skills. So yeah, I'm all for skills building. I'm a preacher on that front.
Hello, my name is Will Wheaton. I know, I can't believe it either. And you are listening to the Reduced Shakespeare Company podcast.
Where can you RSC? The RSC in the U.S. will be performing all the great books abridged in April in Sault Ste. Marie and Holland, Michigan, and Adam Long's newly reimagined production of the complete works of William Shakespeare abridged will be playing across the UK in Basingstoke, Worcester, Epsom, Coventry, Huddersfield, Salisbury, Bristol, Guildford, Lichfield, Southampton, Poole, Hertford, Bedford, Tunbridge Wells, Newbury, Taunton, Exeter, Northampton, Bolton, Watford, Oxford, Ipswich, Bury St. Edmunds, Keswick, Newcastle, Doncaster, Wakefield, and York. Check out the touring page at our website, reducedshakespeare.com, or our social media pages for venue and ticket information. And now back to my conversation with Mike Tucker, head of the Coram Shakespeare Schools Foundation, talking about their annual Shakespeare Schools Festival. You showed several videos at the Shakespeare Theatre Association conference back in January of this program in action, and it was incredibly moving seeing all these kids, like hundreds of kids, working together, playing together, creating art together, and looking like they were having enormous amount of fun. And it wasn't even about that these kids. It's not Britain's Got Talent. It's
Mm-mm.
Britain's got teamwork. Britain's got play. It was really moving to see. Does that happen every time, or were these videos from a festival? Is this the work that happens every week across the country?
So this happens every year and we're right in the middle of the festival, as we call it, the Shakespeare Schools Festival at the moment, where after a number of months of rehearsals in schools, young people perform abridged versions of Shakespeare plays on their local professional stage. And so the
Abridged
videos that we
versions.
put,
Where do people
abridged
get these
versions.
ideas?
Not quite as abridged as Reduced Shakespeare Company. We'd love to be able to do all of them in 90 minutes, but no, we do a mere four in 2 hours because they're abridged to 30 minutes. Which works really well as an entry point, but also for educational purposes. They were born of a cartoon, actually. I think I talked a little bit about this at the association conference. They were born of the animated tales of Shakespeare in the early 1990s, so abridged by some brilliant script writers. So they've got excellent track record of working to tell the story, to move it along, and to engage audiences. But to kind of come back to that culminatory moment where the young people are performing on stage, yes, it does happen, and it happens in different degrees, and it happens in different ways, and the discoveries and the celebrations may not be the ones that one had anticipated. But I think when you go into a project as a teacher director, as a theatre maker, understanding that the value is in the process, not in the product, and that your energy is in creating that really high performing rehearsal room where your ensemble is, not quite, but is singing, is
Mhm.
really, really working hard for one another, and is invested in telling that story. If you get to the performance night and there's, confidence, ownership, vitality on stage. If there's a couple of screw ups, if we miss a line here, that's not what it's about as an audience member. You can see that these young people own and are proud of this thing that they've created together. And that it's Shakespeare. Wow, something I didn't think I was capable of doing a couple of months ago. I've now achieved and I've now done so publicly in front of my local community, and hopefully walked off stage, with a bit of confidence and pride to take into the rest of my life.
It always amuses me when people complain about the curse of saying the title of the Scottish play
Mm-mm-mm.
in a theater, because then things will go wrong. You know what always goes wrong in every live production? Something.
Yeah,
Always. Completely. So that's part of the joy of live theater, is watching things go wrong. And the great lesson of that is that yes, things go wrong and we cover, we acknowledge, we move on, we fix, we move. We can't pretend it didn't happen. It did
absolutely.
happen.
I am more than my mistakes, right? I've learned from them, going back to what we said about failure. And sometimes, perhaps not in the performance itself, but in the rehearsal room, that's where some of the greatest moments come from. Those happy accidents, those really lovely discoveries that one makes if you get a line the wrong way around, or you say it to the wrong character, or you get the wrong, emphasis or something. There is value in that, and again, it's something that it's hard sometimes to reprogram teachers' brains to allow that to happen. I think as drama educators, we get that and we understand, but there's unfortunately been a huge I guess, exodus of drama professionals in the UK over the last 10 years because the curriculum has changed. Let's work hard, us, organisations like the Globe, the Royal Shakespeare Company, the National Theatre, in our own ways. We're trying to really show the value of drama learning within school, not just in that classroom, for everything that it brings to that school life, to create those resilient, conscious, creative, and thriving young people of tomorrow.
And we're back to failure
Absolutely.
and its power and its value. Your keynote address at the Star Conference was delicately placed at the end of the week, right before the big fancy final banquet. And you apologized for that, but not your fault, because that's where they put you. But also your presentation and your closing statements sent us all out of the conference with an inspiring sense of what is possible when we use not the words necessarily, but the worlds that Shakespeare created as playgrounds for young people to learn about the world that they're living in.
It was such an interesting week because there was so much going on outside of the walls of the conference.
Yeah.
The wider world was sending us some pretty scary messages, and I think we were very much in a bubble, but at the same time, perhaps should have been unapologetically in that bubble, because there's something really special about the creative collaboration that was created in that week, and that is a possibility when you work in the way that a lot of the great educators and artists there work. And I think in the UK, the educational context is one that we have seen drama be in decline for the last decade, where art subjects generally are squeezed and are often seen as second class, where creative practice is framed as enrichment rather than entitlement and something that is core to a young person's experience. But again, as a society, as employers, as parents, we hear so much concern about young people's oracy, their ability to speak and listen well, their well-being, the isolation that is very much a response to the pandemic. But a lot of the world that they live in now is a digital space. The lack of civic engagement that results from that, and the sense of belonging, perhaps that is in what young people should be getting. The contradiction, between what we see in school classrooms and what the world needs is stark. We have removed, through curriculum change in the UK, the very spaces that teach young people how to listen, to speak, to collaborate, and to disagree well.
Yeah.
And drama and the creative arts are exactly that. They're not a nice to have. The rehearsal room is not a luxury. I described it as a training ground for democracy. And as educators, we need to insist in our work and throughout a curriculum, young people are heard, that they're trusted, that they're taken seriously. And that, as we'd said, they get a space where they can try, where they can fail, where they can reflect, and they can try again. And I think if classrooms felt a little bit more like ensemble-led rehearsal rooms, young people wouldn't just learn Shakespeare. They'd learn to be great citizens, great collaborators, connected, confident humans. And in a pretty fractured world, that could be one of the most radical acts that we as artists can offer.
That's it for this week's Reduced Shakespeare Company podcast, except for one more thing, which I'll share with you in about 60 seconds, so stick around. You can check out the extraordinary work of the Coram Shakespeare Schools Foundation by going to shakespeareschools.org. Also, let me remind you that for a limited time, Arden Publishers are giving RSC fans a 35% discount off the hardcover edition of Ronan Hatfield's book, Shakespeare in the Theater, Reduced Shakespeare Company. Go to bloomsbury.com and type in discount code RSC when you check out. Send us your playing techniques via email to feedback@reducedshakespeare.com, or throw a comment to us over on the socials or on our own actual website, reducedshakespeare.com, or visit my website, theshakespeareans.com. Thanks as always to equally boyish Matthew Croak, web services by Ginger Power Limited, music by John Weber and GarageBand. Our random fan shout-out this week goes to Cheryl Norton. No reason, it's just random. Special thanks to Will Wheaton, the also equally and eternally boyish star of Stand By Me and Star Trek The Next Generation. And as always, thanks very much to you for listening. I'm Austin Titchener, 1004 3012ths of the Reduced Shakespeare Company. Was it a requisite for the job that you look like you're about 17, like just out of school? Or are you older than you look?
No, it wasn't. I'm older than I look. I've looked like this for 20 years, Austin. I'm closer to 40 than I am 30, but I do look like I'm about 15. But I put it down to good genes, moisturizer, and sleep.
Mike, thank you, buddy. This was really fun. I'm glad we got to do this.
I enjoyed it too. Thanks so much for your time, Austin. We'll stay in touch, and good luck with the tour.
This podcast is a production of the Reduced Shakespeare Company, reducing expectations since 1981. Go to reducedshakespeare.com for performance dates, actor bios, email newsletters, and so much less.